The War Within has recently released, beginning the first of 3 chapters in World of Warcraft's anticipated World Soul saga. I've explored the new zones, reached level 80, as well as completed the initial story campaign. Though I'm still playing the game, progressing my main character and alts, I'm left with a confident, positive impression that World of Warcraft is back on track. I don't aim to review The War Within for all its systems and features in this video, but instead focus on the elements that I believe work to reconnect players to modern World of Warcraft. There will be story and visual spoilers throughout. I advise caution if you're hoping to experience The War Within with fresh eyes. Introductions to narrative and gameplay experiences are most effective when they establish tone and reliable expectations. In games, it is an important part to onboard and invest new players in the experiences on offer. World of Warcraft's later expansions have offered pretty strong openings that successfully propelled the player into action. The War Within is no different, and has probably become my favourite introduction to an expansion yet, beginning with the destruction of Dalaran. To summarise the introduction to the War Within, we prepare the city for teleportation to the new continent Khaz Algar. Upon our arrival, it becomes dreadfully clear that bringing us here was orchestrated by the new center villain, Azj-Kahet. She ambushes the city with her new Nerubian army. They abduct residents of the city while we attempt to save them and also escape. At the end of this event, Khadgar teleports us away so that he can face Azj-Kahet alone. His encounter with her ultimately fails, leading to his apparent death, but also the definite destruction of the city. I don't want to overanalyze old Dadgar's fate presented at this moment, because I'm pretty sure he's not really dead. Actually, I think he's likely going to be a raid boss in the future, but we'll see. So let's start by talking about Dalaran. Specifically, let's talk about why its importance in the world makes its eventual destruction an impactful introduction to this expansion. Dalaran has been a part of the world for a long time. If it was not central to many players' experience in the world, it at least had a peripheral presence. Players who recall adventuring through the Alterac Mountains 20 years ago would remember the great magical shield that surrounded the ruined city of the Kirin Tor. Its presence was a source of great mystery, a magical bubble surrounded by ruined roads and homes, and hosts of mages who patrolled the outskirts. There was no way inside, but there were a selection of quests taking players to the surrounding area. Dalaran and its occupants would remain in the state and the world for 4 years, until 2008 when Wrath of the Lich King released. At this moment, Dalaran finally unearthed itself to take a new position above Crystal Song Forest in the centre of Northrend, leaving behind a great chasm traced with echoes of its magical aura. Dalaran became the player hub during this era of Warcraft. It was a safe skyhold where adventurers would gather in between excursions into the frozen wastes. It's important to note that Dalaran was the center hub for both Horde and Alliance, therefore it was a gathering place for essentially the entire player base engaged in this expansion. The city was a physical form of connective tissue that brought every player in Warcraft together. All factions and races departed the city from the same platform, used the same bank and auction house, and grouped up in packs outside the Violet Hole dungeon. It returned in WoW's later pivotal expansion, Legion. Here, it was yet again a base of operations for players as they combated the forces of the demonic Burning Legion. I know a lot of players were probably sick of Dalaran by the end of Legion, some feeling it overstayed its welcome, and I can appreciate concerns that it would become the safe choice if Blizzard needed a player hub in future expansions. Personally, I felt it was appropriate for Dalaran to be a hub for both of the expansions, considering the Undead Scourge and the Burning Legion fulfilled a combined role in destroying it back in Warcraft 3, but I understand not everyone is partial to the events in that game. Fortunately, those who had concerns of Dalaran making a return as the player hub can breathe a sigh of relief as recent events offer certainty that's not going to happen anytime soon. Regardless of whether you liked it or not, I think it's hard to deny that this magical city was a place with intrinsic connections to the World of Warcraft and its players. I believe seeing Dalaran get destroyed at the start of the War Within has significant implications for the future of World of Warcraft and us, the player. As far as Azj-Kahet is concerned, her actions here establish her as a force to be reckoned with, as well as giving players a motivated goal to defeat her. This is not just because she's the new big bad on the marketing trailers, but because she destroyed a key landmark that played a large role in the player and their character's journey. The impact of this moment has set a precedent that World of Warcraft's story and world is going to change, and the weight of this introduction will ripple through to future conflicts in the expansion. However you feel about it, I think it does show that Blizzard's commitment down this grand narrative arc is a path towards the end of World of Warcraft as it has been, leading to the beginning of a new era. In a previous video, I talked about World of Warcraft's world and how small it felt despite the increase in overall content and player-friendly gameplay systems. I'll link that video in the description if you're interested, but I'd start off this segment saying that I don't believe the War Within has alleviated the general feeling I expressed in that video. I do think though that the new continent or subterranean network named Khaz Algar is a fresh and exciting setting for the player's journey through the expansion. Khaz Algar is composed of 4 new zones: the Isle of Dorn, Ringing Deeps, Hallowfall, and Azj-Kahet. These zones embody a prominent theme for this expansion and World of Warcraft as a whole, one that is familiar to World of Warcraft players everywhere: the tension between light and darkness. The 4 zones are layered on top of each other, with the story moving the player naturally through each one, delving further and further away from the natural world above, their descent concluding at the horrific nest below in the Nerubian Empire. I think the immediate reaction to these zones would be a huge sense of relief that they don't feel like dank and bland cave networks, rather the opposite. While each zone doesn't feel like a tight claustrophobic space, a stellar achievement in its own right, I think the most impressive aspect of these zones is that they all in some way recapture or further develop elements and themes from earlier versions of Warcraft that players originally connected with. The Isle of Dorn is the player's first exposure to Khaz Algar, and I can't say it starts off overly impressive on the first impression. While beautiful, it was nothing especially new, but to its benefit, I think. This humble impression provides players an easy transition to Khaz Algar, a simple place to slow things down a bit and get acquainted to this new world and story. It allows the player some time to properly process the shocking events that led into it, rather than going from one chaotic event to another. As I explored, I found it reminded me a lot of Loch Modan, only prettier, with its soft green grassy hilltops and overall dwarven aesthetic, complemented by a significant presence of dwarven storm riders for those Hinterlands fans out there. It also hosts the new player hub, Dorn, a city heavily rooted in dwarven lore and architecture. I have to admit that over time it was nice to feel this recognizable connection to the old world while being here. After all, the Isle of Dorn is not meant to be a real showcase of what the War Within truly has to offer, but the ideas here are a hint of what's to come. If I could take one phrase from Gandalf, this zone encapsulates the deep breath before the plunge. It is where players feel a part of the natural world before taking a deep dive into the real meat of this new land. It really felt like it was leaning on connections and familiarity to old Warcraft, a design concept that Blizzard develops further as players descend deeper through Khaz Algar. The Ringing Deeps is the first underground zone in the Khaz Algar network. It's a zone comprised of heavy industrial machinery and giant forges, contrasted against a backdrop of natural underground elements like tiered pools of water, glowing stalactites, and intriguing rock formations. People who like dwarven fantasy should feel right at home here, more so than the Isle of Dorn. The standout from the zone for me was the fantastic return of Warcraft's best rat clan, the Kobolds. Anyone who has fond memories of farming candles in Fargo Deep Mine and hunting old Goldtooth is going to have a lot of joy seeing the society explored through the Ringing Deep's questlines. Developing the Kobolds here provide an opportunity to address the thematic conflict between light and dark, given that they preciously rely on candlelight to navigate the dark tunnels. A Kobold-centric dungeon in this zone even works an entire mechanic around this idea. The player is required to manage candlelight against the darker areas of the dungeon. The final boss is literally called the Darkness, just to hit the nail on the head. On the note of dungeons, the Stone Vault reminded me so much of Ironforge, with its concrete walls with flowing rivers of lava. Already, there feels like a consistent attempt on Blizzard's part to evoke our old experiences, using them to create fresh and original content for old and newer players. It's the right kind of nostalgia being utilized here, rather than lazy retreading, and it doesn't stop here. Hallowfall is one of the best zones I've ever seen in World of Warcraft, and makes such a strong first impression. In the distance, embedded in the ceiling, is a giant crystal illuminating the vast cavern space. Its glow highlights the scattered clifftops, riverways, and chapels in the distance. This zone is so captivating, it's the first time in a long time that I felt the need to log my character off somewhere picturesque every time, just so I can set myself up for a fantastic view immediately when I log back in. This zone does a few things to wrap players into the world, both in surface and subliminal ways. Every 3 hours, Baladar will shift from light to shadow, changing the zone's hopeful tone to one of darkness and oppression for 30 minutes, all without sacrificing its natural beauty. A great detail here is the plant life, which all point towards Baladar, dependently reaching for their only light source. It's a small but fantastic piece of world building that helps sell the strain on the world and its characters when that light source is snuffed out. Like the two previous zones, Hallowfall recalls older content to connect players in this new space. Looking towards the center of Hallowfall is the Arathi's Priory of the Flame, a grand chapel that regenerates visual themes and iconography from the fan-favorite dungeon in Vanilla WoW, the Scarlet Monastery. Enemies we face here, both regular trash and bosses, all feel like an homage to the highly fanatic religious order that Blizzard explored previously with the Scarlet Crusade. This one might feel a little on the nose for some players, but that's not necessarily a bad thing here, as thematically, this faction represents the extreme end of how the forces of light war against the coming darkness. This zone embodies the last vestiges of light struggling against encroaching shadow, as the next and final zone, so far, is where darkness takes full hold. As of writing this video, Azj-Kahet is the final destination in Khaz Algar. Azj-Kahet is a true imagining of an arachnid civilization. This city is embedded in webbed rock, outlandish structures, and glowing fungal plant life, creating an unnatural quality that makes it enjoyable to explore. This zone is an effective contrast to the Isle of Dorn, and a sensible conclusion to the journey we've made through the underground. Upon entering, I'm immediately brought back to Wrath of the Lich King, and personally, I think that's a really good thing. Blizzard has taken the opportunity here to revisit the earlier concepts of a spider kingdom that wasn't fully explored in the Azj Naru dungeons in Dragonblight. Here we see it realized in full force. Taking the fight to the Nerubians here is a nice feature for those who wanted to see more of the civilization in Wrath of the Lich King. They are an adversary with long connections to Warcraft lore, and it's really great to see them take center stage in an expansion. Taking a little closer look into the world of Khaz Algar is the sprinkling of new content within it, a feature called delves. Delves are a form of content for solo or small groups of players to take on short adventures. I haven't done too many delves yet, but I think they are a nice addition to the game that provide fun adventures with meaningful rewards to the casual player. Side note, does anyone else recognize the From Software Souls-like fog door at the start of every delve? I had a good laugh at that. It's surely intentional, right? Anyway, I think this bite-sized feature is a good way to accommodate players who don't need the intensity of fast-paced dungeons or heavy raid mechanics. The story in The War Within is still ongoing, but I enjoyed how tight and concise the initial campaign was. Each zone has a nice compact questline comprised of 3 chapters that plot the journey for a small handful of characters who each have satisfying arcs from beginning to end. Along the main story, we are introduced to various factions with side quests to engage in, either during or after the main story, which add further world building and exploration to the player experience. After completion of the zone campaigns, there's a post-level 80 campaign to follow, which at time of writing is not fully released yet, but I am excited to see the Horde and the Alliance making a footprint in the story again. It seems that unlocking the Earthen Allied race is tied to a questline where our factions hand them weaponry and train them for combat. It's a great way to integrate said factions into this setting. I've not done a full investigation into hero talents, but from my experience with my Demon Hunter and Warrior, I am pretty happy with the extra class fantasy on offer. I suspect that the quality of these will vary from class to class and spec to spec. Maybe some of you can share the hero talents you've been trying out. I'd be curious to know what you think. Blizzard has introduced the World Soul Saga with an inciting event that appropriately sets the stage for a long and engaging player experience. They have weaved in elements from the early iterations of World of Warcraft into the zones of Khaz Algar. These elements are implemented organically to visually and thematically connect players to fond experiences and memories they've had within the World of Warcraft, past and present. Within these new lands are big adventures that make broad strokes across the long-standing themes of the game, complemented by smaller player-focused adventures focused on pure and light fun. The story presented so far is handled with care and without bloat. The main cast of characters have clear motivations, with each pursuing their own goals while struggling against their personal darkness. Blizzard takes care not to draw these journeys out too long, as the long-winded approach has proved to damage their storytelling in the past. It is in these ways that I believe the War Within has reconnected to the players of World of Warcraft, myself especially. Let me know in the comments what you think of the War Within so far, and whether you agree or disagree with my points. I'd love to hear all of it. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. See you next time.